All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. This is June the 18th, 2022, and it's 6 p.m. Colorado time. And I'm here to be available in order to answer questions. This is when I'm publicly available these days. And so if you have any questions for me, send them in by email to Aaron, Aaron, at aaronbudjen.net. And I'll be back in 2 weeks in order to address another list of questions. So if there's something on your mind, if there's something that you're curious about, you think that I might give you a different kind of an answer than what you're coming up with yourself, and that might be worth considering, then go ahead and send it to me, and we'll see what I can do. So I'm going to start with a question from Dean and Melinda in Dayton, Virginia. This is about some of the teachings that I do on occasion include a description of mankind's pursuit of trying to live according to the knowledge of good and evil, and how that's been working out for us. And so the question is about the apparent likelihood of God working through 4 different distinct stages of history, demonstrating that there is something wrong with us and that we cannot, or we're not designed to live by the law. So that's what I tend to do, is I tend to describe this in 4 different stages that God is working with in the history of humanity. And his objective in working in these 4 stages in this way is to show us that we cannot live according to the knowledge of good and evil. Now, there are 2 parts to this. There is the law, and then there is the king. So you have to have a definition of what is good and evil, and there are times when people would like there to be a king in order to be the executive who will execute the requirements of the law, mainly to execute punishment for when a person violates the law, that kind of thing. All right, and so what happened was that Adam and Eve made the wrong choice in the Garden of Eden. They were tempted and they ate from the wrong tree, and this was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So now they know what is good and they know what is evil, or at least they can have some discernment concerning that. So this in and of itself kind of becomes a description of the law, but they didn't have anything really well documented. All right, and so while they could grasp kind of a fundamental idea of what is right and wrong, they didn't have anything really formal. So people were left in a condition of having to kind of work this out on their own. And so for that time period between the time of Adam and Eve and the time of Moses, I call that the time era when they really didn't have a formal description of what the law really is, what the knowledge of good and evil really is. And there was no participation from God either. And they didn't really have a formal king to work with either, namely their God. So in this time period, people were pretty much on their own completely. And so I call this the time era when there was no God, they didn't have the right king, and they had no law. Okay? Now, when God set the children of Israel free from slavery, and he established a new nation with them, what he did was he gave them a formal description of the law. And in this description, there was a description of a relationship that would exist between the people and God. And part of this relationship was about the idea that God himself would be their king, that they would not have a formal king. But he, as a king, would not be working with them individually. He would be working with them collectively, as a collective, as a nation. And so because of that, I consider this time era from Moses going forward to be a time when they had the right law, but they did not have the right king. Now, later on, they decided to establish a lineage of kings, and we have the history of that, but I don't think that really qualifies as being the right king, because they didn't do so well. In general, they didn't do so well in asserting themselves as the perfect king. So you have the time era before the law that was given through Moses, where you did not have a king, you didn't have the right king, and you didn't have the right law. From Moses going forward all the way until Jesus, that was the time era when you had the right law, but you didn't have the right king. Okay? When Jesus accomplished his ministry, he set people free from the law. And the way that he did that was through forgiveness, because the law demanded one of two things: either your complete obedience or death, to give kind of a general summary of this. Well, no one was able to obey. And with regards to death, no one really had a life worth giving either. So God manifested in the flesh and gave his life on our behalf, fulfilling the requirements of the law. The law says, do or die. And in this way, God effectively said, fine, I'll die. There's not going to be any doing, so let's just get to it, and just somebody's going to just die. And that turned out to be him. So when Jesus died and then resurrected from the dead, we then have a new covenant that's now going to be invoked. But the law that he gave has been fulfilled. Therefore, we now enter into a time era where we don't really have a law. Okay? We don't really have a law. However, because of the gospel, because of the new covenant, we can now have the right king. We can have the person of our God who can relate to us individually. All right? So from Adam to Moses, you've got no king and no law. From Moses to Jesus, you've got the law but no king. From Jesus on forward until this day, we now have the right king, but we function without the law. All right? In general, this is just a general description of the time era that we are in. Now, during this time era, does that help? Not having the law, but having the right king. Well, for those who have a legitimate dependent relationship on the real king, they will find that as a side effect of this relationship, there will be a reduction of sin in their life to some degree, whatever that might look like. So you could say that there is something better in terms of the effect of sin or the propagation of sin. Things are kind of improved. They're kind of improved a bit, having the right king and not living by the law. But it still isn't perfect. It still isn't going to work out to the degree of perfection. And when we're honest about this, we can be honest and we can say, yeah, that's right. It just doesn't work out perfectly. Okay. Now, eventually, the Lord is going to decide that he is going to return. And when he does, there's going to be the establishment of the Messianic kingdom. And this goes into the realm of the prophetic, of which I am not an expert, and I won't even try to pretend to be. All right, I'll just say it up front that this is just not an area that the Lord has given me any unique insights on. So as much as people are relentlessly asking me questions about prophecy and the revelation and stuff like that, I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to get into it, and I don't have any indication from God that he's going to reveal anything to me before I am dead. All right, so this is just not going to be my role in the church, from what I can tell, and I'm okay with that. He's got other things that he can do with me, and that's what I'm doing. All right, but when the Messianic kingdom is established, whatever that might look like, from what I can tell, just from a general description, that's going to be the fourth era, when you have the right king, and there will be a reestablishment of the Mosaic law, in which case you have the right king and you have the right law. And how does that work out? Well, from what I can tell, there is a final rebellion that happens at the end of this 1,000 years, just as an approximation. Therefore, I will be able to say with some degree of confidence that even if you have the right king and the right law, it still isn't going to work out. It will still end in this form of rebellion. All right? And the point of this is to show that through the knowledge of good and evil, you cannot be who God created you to be. And you'll have all the potential combinations of law and king, if we just have the right leader, the right king, the right executive. No, you have your time period where you don't have the right king, you don't have the right law, then you have the right law, but you don't have the right king. Then you have the king, but you don't have the law. So then what happens when you have both the king and the law? Final rebellion at the end of 1,000 years. You still get that. So that's kind of what I see as how God has divided history up into those particular categories. And that's just me. It's just my thing. I'm not suggesting that there's great legitimacy to that. As far as I know, no one else has suggested anything like that. So we should be cautious about me presenting something that no one else, is considering, or apparently has considered in terms of that kind of a description. I would just want to express some sense of caution when it comes to that. All right. This question is from Stephen in San Diego, California. I have recently been studying the Old Testament prophecies that were fulfilled in Jesus' life, but I am a little confused of this in Matthew 2, verse 23. And he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. And we find out that there is no such prophecy in the Old Testament to fit where Jesus lived in that city as Matthew mentioned in that verse. Do you have an explanation? That's correct. There is no prophecy that anyone has found, I certainly haven't found one, that states that the Messiah will be from Nazareth. I don't have anything specific that I can point to that would say that this is going to be the case. All right? So why would this be in Matthew? Okay, well, the explanations are going to be a challenge because that's what we have. All right, so all I can do is tell you what I go with, what it is that I think. Although my answer to this question, I don't have confidence in being able to say that, oh yes, this is absolutely it, that this is the way it is. All I can say is that this is how I work through it, all right, how I reconcile this. Now, it's my opinion, this is just my opinion, that this is a translational problem. The reason why I think it's a translation problem is because Matthew's gospel was not originally written in Greek. It was written in Hebrew. And his Hebrew was not so good. I know because I have a couple of copies of different manuscripts from different museums of Matthew's gospel that was written in Hebrew. And I've read through portions of it. And from what I can tell, yeah, Matthew's Hebrew was really poor. I do. I think that's the case. I mentioned this, I think, in the programs I did on the Sermon on the Mount. I think that's where I put this in. It could also be in the programs I did on divorce and remarriage. A lot of you might be surprised that there is such a series. I've never broadcasted those programs, and I never will. Okay, those are some tough ones to get through. So they're in the archive, and I did do the recordings, but I'm not going to broadcast them. The ones on the Sermon on the Mount, they're kind of old. It's time for me to redo those. And I think that I spoke about Matthew's gospel there, and his experience with learning Hebrew and why I took a position concerning him having a poor grasp of Hebrew. But what he does record is a good representation of someone who's had about 2 or 3 years worth of study and exposure to Hebrew. I think it's a good representation of that. It's pretty good. But when the early church fathers were working with it, they found that it was just really difficult, really awkward. So they translated it. Some of them translated it into Greek, and they did this translation as best they could. All right. So now you've got a translation into Greek that's kind of close to what Matthew wrote in Hebrew, but it's something that people who know Greek can study and read a little bit and get kind of a general idea of what Matthew was wanting to say. And then it gets translated into English. All right, so there's going to be a lot of distortions in these transitions. A lot of distortions, and there's a lot of potential for discrepancies. All right, and it's my opinion that in this verse, there is some opportunity for discrepancy. My suspicion is that what a person will find if they go through this, they will probably find that the word that was rendered there would be better translated or better rendered as expressing the idea that Jesus was either despised as a person, because the Nazarenes were considered to be people who were, of the lower class of society. They were kind of despised. People made jokes about Nazarenes back then. So that there's potential there, or the word could have been representing the idea of him being a shoot or a sprout of some kind. And we have prophecies that are related to the Messiah being someone who was despised, and we have prophecies related to him being a sprout or a shoot, someone who would come forth from the lineage of kings. All right, so there is some potential there. I personally could do this research, but it's just not that important to me that I'm able to put it on my list to go into it. And I'm sorry, but I know that this verse and this question is going to be really important to a lot of people. But as for myself, because of my knowledge of this and my knowledge of the history of Matthew's gospel, I just read through it and say, well, okay, there's something to look into here. But this particular one is just not that critical for me. It's just not that important. I would like to know, but what I mean by that is in comparison with everything else that I got to do, it's just not going to make it. It's not going to make it to the list. There's just so many other things that I've got that are just going to have priority. Now, someday I would really like to take these manuscripts that I have, which I have these from like I said, from a couple of museums, and that I can read. And I would really like to sit down and do a really good formal translation of the book of Matthew. I would love to do that. Unfortunately, I don't see that happening. Not right now. I have no vision of being able to accomplish that. I will have to study some Latin that I don't know, because I could tell that Matthew's primary language was definitely Latin, in my opinion. It wasn't Aramaic, and I see some Latin in the text, and so I know I'm going to have to spend some time studying Latin, and in order to really work through this really well, I could put a number on it. I would say I would probably want, in the equivalent of today's currency, it would look like somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 in order to purchase the amount of time that I would want to spend to work on this. And yeah, that's a few years. It is. That's a few years worth of labor that I would really want to put into this to do this well. And that kind of funding, that's just way out of my reach. It's just, I just know that there's no way I'll be able to do that. Before I do that, even, I really want to do the work that I started on the book of Isaiah. I started on that. I did really well with that. I've actually made it about halfway through the book of Isaiah, just doing an initial translation on my own. Although you probably will find on YouTube some videos up to, I think, chapter 2 or maybe chapter 3. At By Grace Fellowship, I taught until I think it was chapter 28. But that's what I would really like to do, as a priority. If I was to pick Matthew or over Isaiah, or pick between Matthew and Isaiah, I would pick Isaiah just because that's what I would like to do. But again, I started it and it just wasn't possible for me to continue with it. It was a funding issue. It was a funding issue, and it was also a time issue. Well, they go hand in hand because, I believe it or not, I spent a lot of time just trying to obtain funding so that I can work, which I'd rather not do, because to me that's I call that dead time. Asking for money. Can I have some money so I can go to work? Well, that's the nature of what I do. So I don't know. I really don't know how I can put that together or what I can do with that. But in answer to this question, I'm just letting you know that this is something that could be looked into. This is the direction that I would want to go in. All right. But I'm also describing to you my limitations. Now, even though I have these limitations, well, I'm not the only one on this planet. All right. I think we got about 7 billion people on the planet right now. Maybe one of those other people could possibly do this work. I don't know. All right. Let me move forward. This is from Lisa in Colorado. In a few of your programs, including a recent YouTube message on the book of John, I said that Jesus died on the 14th day of the month. He died on the 14th day of the month. Do you know what month he died? That's the 14th day of the first month in the Hebrew calendar. It's not the same calendar as what we use, so I can't say March or April or May or February. I can't say that because that was according to a whole different calendar entirely, the whole different calendar. The way that you would know what the first month was by harvesting the barley around Jerusalem. All right, so there's no official way to be able to say just what that month was, because it was based on when the barley was being harvested around Jerusalem. There was a team of Pharisees. This is what they would do. They would go around Jerusalem and they would harvest the barley, and then they would put it on a metal plate or pan or something like that, and they would put it over the fire, over an open fire. And if it evaporated completely, then the barley was not ready to be harvested. But if after it was parched with fire, there was some grain that remained, right? It didn't just evaporate because it wasn't ready to be harvested. If there was some grain that remained on the metal plate, well, there's still more, all right? That doesn't officially now say that it's the first month. What they would do is they would keep track of when the most recent full moon was, all right? So they would go back and say, okay, today the barley is ready to be harvested. We parched it with fire, and it didn't just go up in smoke. We have grain here. So let's go look at our records and see when was the most recent full moon, all right? And so they would go backwards and see how many days has it been since the most recent full moon. Now, if it's been 10 days, okay, or less, if it's been 1 day since the most recent full moon, or if it's been 10 days since the most recent full moon, all right, then they would light these signal fires to notify everybody in the nation of Israel that the new month began at the most recent full moon. So then everybody would do a count and they would figure out 1 through 10. Now, if it's the 11th day after the most recent full moon, no, then it's not the first month of the calendar for that year. You got to wait until the next full moon, and then the signal fires are lit, and then people are notified that we now have the first month in the Hebrew calendar for this particular year. That's how it was worked out. It was all based on the 10th day of the month, according to the selection of the Passover lamb. All right, so whatever month it was, okay, if it was the first month, then on the 14th day of that month, then that was the day when Jesus was crucified during this time in history. Okay, but we don't know when the barley was ready to be harvested. We don't know that. Now, using all of the tools of calendars and scientific knowledge, people have made many attempts to try to figure out when this might have been according to the full moons. And from what I understand from the research that I've read, the one that I personally have been the most impressed by is the one that was done by Sir Robert Anderson, and he documented this in his book, The Coming Prince. Okay, so I personally feel that he did the best effort that anyone has ever done, and he came to the conclusion of April 6th, 32 A.D. That's what he came up with. April 6th, 32 A.D., according to his work. What he did not include in his work was what I just described concerning the harvesting of the barley. He had no knowledge of that whatsoever, I guess. Which is okay. I understand that. So he could have been off by 30 days. Okay, he could have been off by 30 days. So even that date, well, that's not necessarily official. All right. So because of this uncertainty, I cannot make the claim that Jesus was actually crucified on April 6th, 32 AD. And I don't even want to say plus or minus 30 days. I don't want to do that because he still could be off a year or two. I don't think we have enough available to have such great certainty. But if you or anybody who's watching this would like to take what I just presented and declare that you have this confident, this is your belief, good for you. You can do that. So that's the best way that I can think of to answer this question. All right, now here's a whole list of questions. This is from Doreen in Dallas. Doreen, you just recently found my program just recently, and I think we talked on the phone recently too. I have some memory connection. If we did, then that's great. I told you that I am having trouble keeping up with correspondence. I am. There's just a lot that has been going on. There's a lot of change going on in people's lives right now, and so I hear from a lot of people. So it's hard to manage what I'm going to do when. But I can make an attempt to answer the questions that you've got. What you've got, from what I can tell, let me just say in summary, you've got a lot of questions, and I just want you to know that this is perfectly normal, all right? Especially for someone who just bumps into some of the things that I've been teaching. You got a hold of the forgiveness of sins. You got a pretty good understanding of that. Well, this is going to cause all kinds of disruption, all right, in your life as you've been noticing. So what I'd like to start with is to encourage you to just take your time, okay? Take your time. I know that all of this is going to be really overwhelming all at once. I can tell by the questions you're asking. Please give it some time. Like a year or two. Take your time with this. Don't try to get it all together right away because it can be overwhelming, all right? Don't worry about some things. Some things you're gonna run into, and you're gonna say, "I just don't understand." Just identify it as something that you just don't understand right now, and put it on a list that it's something that you want to understand later. And don't get overrun by things that you're going to run into. I say that because from my experience with this kind of communication, this tends to happen, all right? This can happen maybe in a couple months from now or something where you start panicking, over this is just way too much. So, and too much uncertainty. All right, so please try to keep that in mind. All right, so let's see. We've got one of my questions is, what is the best way for me to begin reading through the scriptures? Do I start in the Old Testament or the New Testament? Do I start with the Gospels or epistles? Many times before I have started in Genesis and never made it to Numbers. All right, and then now this is what you asked me on the 28th. I remember this, May 28th. This is now June 18th. See, you're in the queue, But you asked me this again recently through my personal email for this Q&A. Same question. All right, now I don't think that there is a good answer for this question to say do this. I don't think there is. I would say, from my experience, the best approach is to just read whatever you're actually going to read. Like you said, you started in Genesis and you just didn't make it to Numbers. You got stuck. You got stuck in Leviticus, all right? Fine, I understand. Exodus is the giving of the law, and then Leviticus starts out with, well, these are the sacrifices for when you break it. And that's a lot to go through. It is. It's a lot to go through. All these things you're now going to do when you don't make it in trying to obey what was given in Exodus. So I can see you maybe not making it to Numbers, because that's a long ways to go in terms of, all right, how are we going to handle the laws now when people don't obey them and they violate them? All right. So to me, I would just keep in mind that it's good to read just whatever you're going to read. All right. You can go through Genesis and you can go through Exodus just from the perspective of, this is the story. These are the events that happened. These are the things that happened. This is what people said. This is what people did. That's easy reading in a sense, right? You can go through Kings in the same way, Chronicles in a similar way. You can go through Joshua. There's lots of books in the scriptures that you can read through that kind of have this story feel to them, and that you can go through. And this is good. So if you're going to read it, if you're reading it, then read it. If you find yourself falling asleep, right? Here's the thing. If you find yourself drifting away, falling asleep, it's because you don't understand what you're reading. And it's okay if you don't understand what you're reading. Just put it aside, come back to it another time. It could be that there are things that you need to learn before you go into these things. I mean, like Galatians, for example. I would not want to encourage you to go through Galatians right away. Certainly not. Definitely read through the book of Acts first. And I wouldn't even want to encourage you to start there. Start somewhere else. So whatever it is you're reading, as long as you are reading, it's good. That's my own personal point of view. An approach that you could take that I've never taken, but I think it could be worth doing, is to just find some general surveys, some essays that people have written to describe the book. This is the book of Jonah, and here's a few paragraphs on what the book of Jonah is about. This is the book of Ruth, and here's a few paragraphs that kind of give you a general idea of what it's about. Just reading through some surveys like this, just understanding that you're reading through them just to kind of get a general idea. I think this can be a good thing. I do. All right. Now, having said all of that, as you've discovered the radio program that I've done, and you're now running into the YouTube videos, the work that I'm doing on the Gospel of John is being done for the purpose of introducing the work that I have done to people. I'm trying to produce them as a starting point, as a place to start. There's a lot of repetition there, especially in the later chapters. And I'm trying to do these recordings for the purpose of being an introduction for people who are kind of new to the work that I'm doing. You'll find that a lot of the stuff that I've done, especially in the past, a lot of it was recorded kind of like in crisis mode, I'm on the air. I've got to have some content put out there. Who am I talking to? Well, I'm talking to a lot of mature believers, or let me say it differently. I'm talking to a lot of people who have a lot of Bible knowledge. I've got to address a lot of the issues that we're going to have some disagreement on. What are the topics that are the most important that can at least get a person saved and work them through the law right away? I was not able, because I had a limited amount of time, very limited amount of time, limited amount of resources. And so most of what I've done, it really, to me, feels like just crisis production. These are things that just have to be put out. And that's what it's looked like for 15 years, I guess, something like that. Feels like that. So for me to do the new stuff on the Gospel of John has a whole different tone for me to what it is that I'm doing. So in the midst of what you start with and what you read through, I'm going to encourage you to go through the videos and the radio programs that are in the archive on the Gospel of John, because I think you'll find that worth pursuing. And then the rest of the subjects, I would say just go through whatever grabs your attention, whatever grabs your attention, and expect to listen to those things again. I'll tell you that the average, the length of those radio programs, they're set at 27 minutes to 27 minutes and 30 seconds. And then you subtract the intro and the outro. And in general, what you end up with is something that looks like about 25 minutes, 25 to 26 minutes worth of actual teaching. Now, out of those 25 minutes of teaching, the average amount of time that a person listens to those programs is 34 minutes. Okay, I did a computational analysis of this, studying the downloading of the data, and the average amount of time that a person listens to each program is 34 minutes. That's average. All right, so some people listen all the way through and they don't rewind. Others rewind. All right, so you can figure that there's a lot of people who are spending maybe 40, 45 minutes listening to a 25-minute program because they're rewinding and they're going back and back and back. All right, and the reason why is because I will say something, and what I say, that has some pretty serious implications. I'll say something that just really means a lot. And what it implies is going to have consequences for a lot of things. And your mind is going to start to wander with that. And you're going to think, my goodness, he just said that. Well, then that means this, and that means this, and that means this. And you're going to be lost in this for a few minutes. And then you're going to realize the recording has been playing still. And you missed out on the other things that I just said in those last 5 minutes that you got distracted. All right, this is what happens to everybody, most everybody. And so people rewind, or they listen to it again. And every time they listen, they hear something new. And they hear something new because they got distracted by the implications of something I just said. So eventually, you'll hear me say something that today is just exceptionally profound and earth-changing, life-changing, and everything. And eventually you'll get used to it, and then you'll hear it and you'll say, okay, yeah, all right. And then you can hear what I say afterwards. Right? That's kind of how that goes, okay? All right, let's see. What else did you say here? How can I best learn the difference between the old and new covenant? I did a program titled Everlasting Covenant in the archive. And the purpose of that program really was to give a direct and clear description of the differences between the old and the new covenant. That's in that program. But it really is throughout all of the other programs that I've done. After you get done with the Gospel of John, go to the other channel I have You're watching this on Aaron Budjen Live. Well, I got another channel, Aaron Budjen. And in the Aaron Budjen channel, I uploaded some better refined presentations on the book of Hebrews that I did recently. So after you get done with the Gospel of John, or, halfway through, then go to the programs I did on the book of Hebrews, and you'll find a lot of content in there where I describe the differences between the Old and the New Covenant, kind of littered throughout it. All right, and it really is everywhere in the program. So this is something that you'll pick up on just as you go. All right, and take your time as you go, but you'll pick up on that really well as you go. All right, let's see. You have a question about your daughter. She's asking about something. Let me check the time. I'm going to come back to this one. Let's go to the next one you've got. You got here a question about prayer. Considering God as the Almighty, seated on his throne in heaven, and as our Father in heaven, where Jesus went to sit at his right hand, and as the Holy Spirit dwelling within me, and as my friend who is living life with me, how do I focus or direct my prayers? Do I direct my prayers to him as my friend and Holy Spirit within me, or should I direct my prayers to the Almighty Father in heaven, in which case there's some sense of distance? How do you pray, right? I mean, how do you do that? The first thing I like to say is that usually the first thing that gets disrupted in a person's life when they listen to me too much is their prayer life. All right, this is just disrupted. This is all messed up. Okay, don't feel alone with this, Doreen. All right, don't feel alone. Lots of people are watching this with you right now, and they're nodding their head, saying, "Yeah, that's the first thing that got all messed up." Give this one some time. Give it a chance. With some of the things that you've said here, you might want to listen to the programs I did on the Trinity. But please just be aware that this is something that I'm just a little bit off on from a lot of people's point of view. Okay, I'll tell you that just recently, the owner of a lot of the radio stations who Living God Ministries broadcasts on, the owner of these stations was challenged recently about my position on the Trinity. He got a lot of complaints from his staff, from the people working for him, for the managers of the radio stations and other folks. He got some complaints. They just didn't like what I was saying on the air, and this was instigated by some listeners who were listening, and they complained. And so the complaints went all the way to the owner, of these stations. And so the owner sends me an email, because we're of course on a first name basis, and he says, "Now, Aaron, we're getting all these complaints. Explain." That's all he gave me. Explain. Let's have it. So I wrote him a couple sentences. And I told him, and these are the programs that I've done. Why don't you listen to them? And if you don't like them, I'll tell you what, I'll never broadcast them on your station. Okay? I'll never do it. I'll never upload these. If you've got a problem with anything that I say in these programs, you let me know, and I assure you they will never be broadcasted on your stations. So he took some time. He and his dad, all right? They took some time. They did, and they studied this topic. And they wrote back, and they wrote back to everybody, all right? Everybody in their whole radio network, they sent them a notification that not only is what I am teaching welcome on his radio stations, but he was exceptionally thankful for what I presented. That was his point of view. Okay, so I want you to know that some people don't like it, other people do, and well, I'm still on the air. And I have, I've got official certification that I can still say those things that I'm saying. So look into that, and get an idea about what I think about that topic. And with that, you'll appreciate a little bit more about what I mean when I just simply answer this question with yes. All right, That's all you get, Should you pray as God Almighty seated on the throne at a distance? Go right ahead. Sure, as the Holy Spirit who is close and dwelling within you? Absolutely. All right. All of it's correct in that sense. Okay, so when would you discriminate or when would you discern? You're going to work this out on your own. All right, you really are. I'll tell you for myself personally, there's just different times, different tones, different attitudes, different problems. Sometimes I want to talk to a God who's right here with me. Other times, I kind of would rather him be over there. And so I do it all, I do it all. You can do it all. Don't worry about this so much, okay? This will work itself out just fine. Okay, Genesis chapter 2, verse 25, and Genesis chapter 3, verse 7, with regards to Adam and Eve being without clothing. Is there any profound significance to this? This is your question. Why does Genesis 2, verse 25 refer to Adam and Eve being... I'm just changing the words a little bit because I just feel awkward in saying some words, okay? Being without clothes, and yet felt no shame. And Genesis 3:7 referred to their eyes being opened and their realization that they were without clothing. I grew up being taught that the original sin, the knowledge of good and evil, referred to the kind of intimacy that would probably happen between them. I don't believe so now, but I still wonder why both verses refer to their lack of clothing. What's the big deal, right? Okay, well, there are some verses in Genesis chapter 1, 2, and 3 that when I read them and I study them, I can see that they're talking about specifics. All right, I can see some. I read through some and I see, okay, this is relating some specifics. But most of them are relating a general idea. They're not written for the purpose of expressing specifics, but they're written for the purpose of expressing something kind of in general. And in these verses, that's what I see. I see an expression of something general. Because of that, I can't answer a specific question, all right? I can't do it. I'm sorry. I really don't know. Not with any absolute sense of confidence as to why this was picked, okay? But I can say that regardless of what this was about, things are very different now. Whatever it was that was going on there, whatever it was, things are definitely different now, and I will wait for some additional insight on this. And so I'm just saying this to answer your question and say that from my point of view, this was very general. I think that if we would like some specifics, I would go to other places in the scriptures. All right, I would. I just go to other places. I go to the Mosaic Law. I go to places in the letters that Paul wrote. We can go to the letters to the Corinthians. I would go there. And I tend to go there looking for specifics because I just can't see enough content here in these verses to get specifics out of them. All right? So that's what I will say. I will say go to other places in the scriptures for this kind of a question. All right. Referring to Genesis chapter 6, was mankind originally created to be immortal from the beginning? Did God change his mind and made them mortal at this point in life because of their sin? Not in Genesis chapter 6. That mortality began in Genesis chapter 3. When they ate from the wrong tree, everything changed. So there is a reference in Genesis chapter 6 that he will, strive with man for only so many years. They're only going to be alive for so long. That to me also is a general description. But when it comes to the change from immortality to mortality, To me, that change happened in Genesis chapter 3 when they ate from the wrong tree. All right, so now what kind of significance might we be able to identify, speak about, learn about, speculate on with regards to the state of immortality that Adam and Eve enjoyed? I personally don't think we could get very far at all, because from what I can tell, whatever they had, it didn't last long. All right? Whatever that state of immortality was, it didn't last long enough for it to be significant at all. So I just let that subject go. Okay? That's as far as I go with that particular subject. The rest of it, I know that people could probably have wonderful conversations over coffee for hours on this one, but I won't touch it. No, that's as far as I can get with that. All right, let me go back up to the question your daughter had asked. She sees no purpose for her existence in this life. Sounds like a normal 15-year-old. All right? No purpose for her existence in this life. All right? Perfectly normal. All right? Now, it just so happens that I have a daughter who just recently turned 16. And my son, he's going to be 15 too. He's going to be 15 soon as well. And my youngest, she's going to have an 11th birthday pretty soon. And so I've got some kids around this age. I'm old, but well, that's what I got. And I've put a lot of time into them, all right? And so I have not gotten an indication that they are struggling with this question. So I will say that my kids are a little bit unusual, all right? Yours is more normal than mine. But I'll tell you that one of the things that I really have spent a lot of time with my kids on, all the way from when they were 3, 4, is that if they are bored, it's time to learn how to do something new. That's just my theme, If you're bored, it's time to learn how to do something new. Now, unfortunately, they've reached an age where I can present them with something new to learn, and they just say, no. Okay? So that's expired. That's expired in a sense. I'm still working really hard to present new things. I presented something new to them a few days ago, last week, and we're working through some of this stuff, and I'm hoping it'll stick, hoping 2 of them will stick with it and move forward with it. I think it's great, something new and exciting, and it's through these things that you find purpose. Okay, you find your purpose by participating in the things of life. And so if you have no purpose, you see no reason for existence, that's because it's time to learn how to do something new. That's my best answer. All right. Now, when it comes to your relationship with God, absolutely, I think that is the ultimate defined sense of purpose and value for existence. Very few people make it that far, in terms of establishing a relationship with God such that they participate in the things that He is doing and discover new things because He reveals them to you. Most people just will never come close to that. Those who do will experience a very special life, and I wish this for everyone, but I know that just not everyone is going to make it that far. So for those who don't experience the ultimate value and the ultimate expression of purpose for existence, which is found there in a relationship with the Lord and being an active participant in His life, the things that He's doing, and to be learning from Him, without that, well, you got the things in the world. And there's lots of good things in the world that a person can learn and discover and be a participant in. But there will be a limit. You'll only be able to feel fulfilled with that for so long. And then you're going to need to go to something else. Some people can make it 3 minutes. Some people 3 days. Some people maybe 30 years, on something. They discover a hobby that they just really love. Okay? whatever it may be, it will only go for so long. It will only go so far, because the way that God designed us was such that we will never have absolute fulfillment in the things that he created in this world. He's not going to let that happen. We weren't created in that way, because he wants us to experience that only through the personal interactive relationship with him. So going back to this question, seeing no purpose for a person's existence in this life, well, there are lots of things that can keep you going. There are lots of things that you can go from one thing and then to another thing and then to another thing. This world is filled with so many of these things that you could keep going until you're physically dead. But the hope is that you will also embrace what God has to offer through a relationship with him personally, because that's where true peace and joy will be found. Okay? All right, and then there's more. She dismisses the gospel saying, I believe that there is a powerful God, but I don't believe in his love. Because why does he allow bad things to happen when he has all the power to stop them? Okay, now this is a common question. If God has all the power to keep bad things from happening, well, then he can't be a loving God because he doesn't do it. And in fact, probably the most popular theology within Christianity says that he decides what will happen and what will not happen. He has absolute control, and he has predestined all things. And so even the bad things, those are under his control, and those are his decision, and his sovereignty commands that all these bad things happen. What are you going to do with that, right? I don't believe in that theology. Okay, I don't. But that's going to be competition for a question like this as well. You think that this is bad? Well, you try to add that theology on top of it, and it's even worse. How could you believe in a God like that? All right. Now, there's a lot to say about this. I did do a series of programs for Living God Ministries on suffering. All right. And that's a great place to start. Okay. That's a great place to start. People tell me they listen to it 3 or 4 or 5 times just because they want more suffering in their life. You'll know what I mean. And when you listen to those, you'll know what I mean by that. All right. So that's a good place to start when it comes to this. There are other things to say. Okay. Let's start with, if God could do something about it, then he is evil because he doesn't. This is not a good way to relate to people in general. That just because somebody can do something for you, or for anybody for that matter, that doesn't mean they're required to. It just doesn't. It doesn't mean that they are obligated to do this. A belief like that is found in a lot of different places. My favorite is, to each according to his ability and to each according to his need. If you have the ability, well, then that's what you do for everybody. And if somebody needs, well, then you're the one who fulfills those needs. It shows itself in all kinds of contexts. But you need to get in touch with that. That, yeah, God can do a lot, but that doesn't mean he's required to. And you don't have the legitimate right to accuse God of being an evil person because he doesn't intervene, because he doesn't do things. If you're going to pass judgment on God like that, you need to rethink who you are, and you need to rethink who he is. And a better approach, instead of expressing your profound sense of pride, and that you are the judge of God. You decide whether he is okay or not. You decide if he is loving or not. Well, he doesn't fit your definition of love. He doesn't. He's got his own. And it might be in your interest to find out what that is. So this is how I would encourage a person to start. Because you got a long journey ahead of you. If this is your view of God, you got a long ways to go. A long ways to go. I would start with this. You should ask a different question. Why would he not intervene? Why would he not? If he can do something to stop pain and suffering, then why would he not do this? That's the right question to ask. Instead of just condemning him for not doing something you think he should do, you should ask the question, why would he not do something? And look for an answer for that. And you should be able to find a few answers for that. And I'm not going to give you the answers for that. I think that's something that, if you are so wise and profound, and I'm just exaggerating, of course, okay? If you want to take the position that you are the judge of God, well, then, you obviously got something going for you. You should be able to come up with some reasons on your own as to why God would not intervene. Okay? Okay, I'll give you a hint. All right, the hint is that there will be consequences to his actions. So I understand there can be some bad things that will happen, but you know what? There can be some other consequences that will interfere with some other things that are more important. So it has to do with consequences. And this is common for someone who is a teenager or who's in their 60s and are acting like a teenager. All right? that people just don't really think about the consequences of their actions so much. They don't think about the consequences of other people's actions, of other people's decisions. That even if you do something that you think is good, that you think is right, it might have tremendous consequences. That, well, maybe you don't suffer for those. Good for you. But other people will, Other people are going to suffer bad for these kinds of consequences. The consequences are going to be profound. And sure, you can claim, well, I don't know. I don't understand. All right, fine. Good for you. But everybody else, well, okay. No. All right, no. So you should ask a different question. You should ask, what would be the consequences if he did? And if you start to approach it from that point of view, then maybe you'll begin to have some understanding as to why he doesn't intervene. And you can have some appreciation for why he doesn't. Maybe you can be thankful for why he doesn't intervene on many of these circumstances you think he should do something about. It might turn out that you'll be thankful that he doesn't. Even though the consequences of the suffering are big, well, the consequences of his intervention might be even worse, might be bigger, and would have profound eternal consequences and results. All right, so please try to consider what those things may be. And, I'm not making fun of your age, all right? What I'm going to say is that this can be a lifelong pursuit, and a lot of people never even think about that for very long even, and they just go ahead and get through their life anyway. So those are some tough issues, and I would just encourage you to continue to move in that direction as best you can. Okay, but whatever you do, be careful when you pass judgment against God, because he might have a different point of view when it comes to these kinds of things. All right, that's it for today. I'm going to stop here. I've got another question that came in from Susan as well. I think you sent this today. I'm going to cut and paste this into the beginning. I'll let that be the first question I answer when I come back in 2 weeks and do this again. Okay. For those of you who are having trouble watching the live presentation on Sunday mornings and otherwise, I know that there's some disruptions in the feed. Folks, that's probably on my end here. I think it has to do with my equipment and my internet connection. I would like to look into it, but if it's anything, it's either my modem or my router. And if it is, I can't afford to replace them right now anyway, and so I'm not even going to try to test it. So I may, I don't know, I may end up needing to do recordings in advance and then upload them afterwards. that'll give the impression that it's live. I might need to go in that direction. So in the meantime, for those of you who are experiencing these disruptions in the live presentations that I'm doing online, just send me a quick message and just keep me updated with it, okay? Just let me know, yeah, there was a disruption in the feed. Today, you were offline for 5 minutes and then came back on or whatever. Give me this information. Don't expect me to reply, please, but go ahead and send it to me so that I can kind of keep tabs of things, because I'm not watching the same time. I don't know what's happening, and I'll work on it. All right, I'll do what I can do. Thank you.